All right, guys, so hopefully you've had plenty of time to knock out a good portion of those bridal party pictures and your first look. And now we're off to the ceremony. Now, depending on your religion, your family traditions, and your personal preferences, everyone's gonna have a slightly different ceremony experience. And since everyone has a slightly different ceremony experience, we can't really say what a normal ceremony might entail. So we are just going to go over what we see a lot of ceremonies include over the years that we've filmed weddings. So with that being said, if you have any questions about any specific practices, given your religious preference or your cultural background, please feel free to post those right in our private Facebook group or email me directly, and we'd be happy to address those. Let's get started. So the ceremony will begin with the arrival of your guests as they make their way to their seats. Now, in some religious traditions, guests will be seated separately by their side of the family, the bride on the left and the grooms on the right. This actually comes from a time when marriages were arranged as a business transaction between families and was seen as the normal practice. But nowadays, most couples would rather just mix the crowd together as a symbolism for unity. Ultimately, that choice is up to you. Regardless of whatever you choose, it's always customary to have the parents and the grandparents of each side at the front row. So reserving the seats might be a necessary step when it comes to setting up your ceremony space. Once everyone's taken their seat, the processional will begin. The officiant will be the first to walk down the aisle and stand at the arbor. From here, this is a good time to have them make any announcements you want made, since everyone's attention will already be on them. If you plan on having an unplugged wedding, for example, then this would be the time to have them mention this to the audience. Do not just rely on putting up a sign, because most people will simply ignore the request. We want your guests to be able to live in the moment and enjoy themselves, rather than worrying about getting their own angle of the bride walking down the aisle. A picture I know a lot of us are familiar with. Once all opening remarks have been made, the ceremony processional will begin. Now, the next person to make their way down the aisle will be the groom. Now, in some traditions, he will be escorted down the aisle by his parents before hugging them and having them take their seats. But in others, the parents and grandparents will actually be part of the bridal party and they'll walk first, then the groom will follow suit. So this is up to you if you want to have everyone have their own moment, or if people just want to take their seats, that's fine too. My only recommendation is to insist that everyone walk down the aisle rather than entering discreetly from one of the sides. For some reason, I see this occasionally happen where the groom and his groomsmen will be told to enter the ceremony in a single file line from one side of the aisle rather than going down the aisle itself. I honestly don't know where this came from, and it doesn't make sense to me. So you're basically just reserving the spotlight of the aisle for the ladies, when the guys are equally as important, literally the other half of the bridal party. All you're doing is you're forfeiting a perfect opportunity to get the best picture of the groom's genuine happiness as he makes his way down the aisle, surrounded by his friends and family. But again, that's up to you. Just my 2 cents. Depending on how many people you have in your bridal party, you may want to consider pairing individuals up from both sides to walk down together, or otherwise go one at a time, staggering people from each side to help drag out time and spotlight each individual. Each member of the bridal party will then be split and line up on their respective sides, with the maid of honor and the best man being closest to the couple. This is so they can be there to take the bride's bouquet and hand the groom the rings. Now, in most traditions, the next person to walk down the aisle will be a little boy known as the ring bearer, whose job is to transport the rings down the aisle to the best man before joining his family in the audience. Then from there, the last person to walk down before the bride will be the flower girl. She'll be leaving a path of flower petals behind as she walks down the aisle before joining her family in the audience as well. Now, with that being said, we've seen so many creative variations of this over the years, from grown men being flower girls to a ring bearer security detail. So don't be afraid to break the mold here. Finally, the bride will be the last to walk down the aisle. Now, tradition states that music will cue, the guests will stand, and the bride will be escorted down the aisle by her father for the ceremonial handoff. However, we've seen brides escorted by parents, siblings, a pet, or just by themselves entirely. Again, it's totally up to you. The bride will then be handed off with a hug and a handshake before the father takes his seat, and from there, the ceremony begins. We'll then see a speech from the officiant, the contents of which may vary entirely depending on the individual, their culture, and their religious background, but this part will normally be between 5 and 10 minutes in most ceremonies. At this point, many traditions will either call upon a few pre-selected guests or members of the bridal party to give a speech. Many will take this time to share pieces of scripture, metaphors of love and marriage, or a relevant poem. However, including readings is not required by any means, and in a lot of weddings is skipped altogether. So this is for you to decide. Once the speeches have been completed, most cultures who observe any religious traditions will commence a prayer or some kind of communion, the order of which varies between each religion. Now, again, this is not something that's required and will ultimately be up to you and your spouse if you want to have that featured. A more popular trend we see these days will instead be to have a joining ceremony. This is where the couple would merge two objects together in an irreversible way to symbolize their commitment to one another. Some choose to mix wine, others will combine sand in a jar, or I've even seen couples water a plant. This is a great feature to include if you're looking to further personalize your wedding ceremony and take home a momentum as well. At this point, the couple will then share their vows with one another, each taking turns to express their love and commitment to each other. Now, we've touched on this a little before, but here is where you have the option of doing the traditional vows, where you each just repeat what the officiant says, or personally written vows, where you get to speak from the heart. Now, there's no right or wrong way to do this, it's just gonna be your preference. Once those vows have been shared, you will then take turns exchanging the wedding rings at the words of your officiant. And with those now completed, you will kiss your fiance for the last time as you officially become a married couple. You would then take each other's hand and, to the cue of music, walk back down that aisle as your family and friends cheer and throw stuff at you. And just like that, you're married. So that's a pretty good idea of what a typical wedding ceremony looks like. Obviously, there's a few different traditions that you might experience when planning your own, since many cultures do things differently. Like maybe you want to include a ceremonial gift exchange, like we see in a lot of Chinese family weddings. Or perhaps you'll toast to the ancestors with a shot of sake, as done in a lot of Japanese weddings. That's actually one of my favorite ones. Or if you're Jewish, you want to stop on the huppah glass and shout Mazel Tov. Everyone has their own traditions to consider, but ultimately your ceremony is about you and your love for one another. And next to that, nothing else really matters. Thanks for watching, you guys. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget that you can subscribe to our channel right here, and we will see you in the next video.